Your Data Studio reports take ages to load? Maybe we can do something about it. Hi, this is Ahmed from CRWalk with another Data Studio tutorial, and today we're going to learn about the different factors that affect the performance of a Data Studio report. And then we're going to see how we can adjust those factors to optimize our reports for peak performance. Let's begin. First of all, let's see what impacts the loading speed of our Data Studio reports and what happens in the background when we load a report. When a Data Studio report is viewed or a new filter or date range is applied to the report, some things need to happen in order. Let's see. So for example, here I want to change the date range of the report to last quarter, for example, and hit apply. When we apply this date range, for each chart on the report canvas, Data Studio needs to retrieve data from the data source. This means that it should send an API request to ask for data from each data source. And then it needs to wait for the API to respond back and send the requested data. When it receives data, it can do the calculations needed for any custom fields in the data source. And then if it's a blended data source, it should perform the data blending. The process of retrieving data is what usually takes the longest amount of time, and a lot of factors can come into play to cause the process to slow down. For example, slow responses from the APIs if the dataset is large in volume, or if the tool needs to process data before responding to the API request. For example, when you apply a segment to a Google Analytics data source, Google Analytics needs to process data and calculate the numbers for that segment first before it can return data back to Data Studio. Another reason for slow performance can be poorly configured dataset, that it requires a large volume of data to be retrieved when the report is being loaded. And finally, placing too many components on a single report page can also slow down the process. Remember, for each component, Data Studio should retrieve data from that data source separately. And then, when data is received, Data Studio can visualize data on the canvas using charts and graphs, tables, scorecards, and usually this happens fairly quickly, if not instantly. So basically, if we can use a data source with quicker response time and place fewer components on each page, we can hugely improve the performance of our Data Studio reports. Let's take a look at a few examples. The first example is another version of the same report we were looking at, but instead of using a single scorecard to show each number, I've used one table per data source. And I've added 3 metrics to that table. Let's go to the edit mode and see how it works. So instead of 3 different scorecards, this is a table without a dimension and with 3 metrics. So if I go back to view mode and apply another date range, for example, let's use last year, only 2 API requests should go to Google Ads and Facebook Ads to retrieve data. And it speeds up the data retrieval process. Compare it to the setup that we had on the previous page, where for the same data, for the same numbers and comparisons, we needed to send 6 API requests, 3 for each data source to retrieve the same set of data, which of course, it would take a bit longer. Now, let's take a look at another example in which we're going to compare the data retrieval speed of the same data set, but from different data sources. For this example, I've created a few different reports in which I'm trying to show the table with 2 dimensions, landing page and source medium. And I had to obfuscate the landing pages because it's my client's data, plus a few metrics, each compared to their values in the previous time period. But each time, I'm going to connect the table to a different data source. Same data, but 4 different data sources. The first one is a live connection to Google Analytics. So for this table, I've used the normal built-in standard connection to Google Analytics. If you want to see which data connector did I use, it is this one, Google Analytics by Google. It creates a live connection to Google Analytics through the API from within Google Data Studio. So if I apply date range to this report, for example, if I select last year, then Google Data Studio should send an API request to Google Analytics asking for 2 years of data, the numbers for the last year and the numbers for 2 years ago for the purpose of comparison. And that would be a lot of data to retrieve from a live API. Let's see what happens. I guess it would take a bit long for Data Studio to request the data, for Google Analytics to prepare the data and bring it back to this report. It took about 10-15 seconds, something like that, but we got our data in the end. Let's see the same data set, but this time retrieved from another data source, from a Google Sheet. Now, if I apply the same date range to this one, instead of going back and APIing to Google Analytics to process data and send it back to Data Studio, we've already did the API request in a Google Sheet, and the data is ready in the Google Sheet for Data Studio to retrieve. So basically, here we have done the data extraction part beforehand, and our data is processed and ready in a Google Sheet for us to retrieve. Let's try it. Select date range and last year and hit apply. It should be much quicker, and as you can see, it just took like a couple of seconds for Data Studio to retrieve pre-extracted, pre-processed data from a Google Sheet, from a spreadsheet hosted somewhere else, and just show data in this table. In the next example, again, we're going to retrieve the same set of data, but instead of Google Analytics or a Google Sheet, we're going to retrieve it from BigQuery and through BI Engine. If you haven't heard of BigQuery, it's Google's super fast petabyte scale data warehouse. So think of it like a Google Sheet on steroids. You can put your data there. It should be extracted from Google Analytics first. You need to put it in a table, kind of a database table in BigQuery data warehouse, and then you can connect Data Studio to BigQuery to read data from there and not from Google Analytics. And the BI Engine is a relatively new service from BigQuery, which loads tables, the BigQuery tables, in RAM, so they can be accessed and processed and queries super quickly, almost instantly. When we load our data to BigQuery, we can use a standard data connector from within Data Studio, this one, to connect to our BigQuery table and read data from it. So let's go back to view mode and apply the same date range last year. It was quick, wasn't it? Now, you might think that it was fairly about the same speed of a Google Sheet. Why should we try and load our data in a BigQuery table? For that, we need to keep in mind that the amount of data and the volume of data that we are retrieving for this example, 2 years of data, landing page source median with 3 metrics, is not considered that large of a volume. BigQuery can handle, store, and allow us to query gigabytes, terabytes, and petabytes of data with about the same speed that we see here. But there are limitations to Google Sheet. It cannot have more than 5 million cells in it. And even if we are close to a few million cells of data in a Google Sheet, the process of retrieving data from that would be much, much slower. But it's worth to mention that to load your data from Google Analytics to BigQuery, you need time and you need resources, and maybe you need to use some tools like Fivetran or Supermetrics for BigQuery, or you need to be using Google Analytics 360, which is the paid version of Google Analytics. Or else, if you want to load your other datasets, Facebook ads, Google ads, any other datasets also in BigQuery, again, you either need some experience, skills, and development resources to be able to pipe your data into BigQuery or stream it in real time, or you need to use, again, some paid tools to do that. But if you don't have that, don't worry. There's still another example that we need to look at, and that is extract data source. Extract data source is a special kind of data connector in Google Data Studio. Let me show you. The difference of extract data source and other types of data sources and data connectors is that an extract data connector doesn't directly extract data from a different tool like Facebook Ads or Google Ads or Google Analytics. What it does, it allows you to get one of the data sources that you already have and select which dimensions and metrics do you want to extract from that data source and keep it within Data Studio. Now, if you want to learn exactly how to use extract data in Data Studio, I have another tutorial in Measure School that you can look up and watch. But for now, as you can read here, data extract creates a snapshot of your data. This can make your reports load faster and be more responsive when applying filters and date ranges. So for example, you can extract data from a Facebook ad data source that you already have, from a Google Ads data source that you already have, and make that a snapshot available in Data Studio for your reporting purposes. Now, the best thing about extract data is that, as I've heard, when you create a snapshot of your data with extract data, it actually stores that snapshot in a BigQuery table in the backend. So it uses the BigQuery's infrastructure to keep a snapshot of your data for Data Studio to use. And that's why it's super quick and responsive to applying filters and date ranges to your data. Let's apply the same data range again. So last year, and hit apply. And when I hit apply, we can expect some kind of speed close to what we would expect from a BigQuery data source. That's it. The report loaded almost instantly. Now, you might ask, why use a BigQuery when we have access to extract data source that can easily and with a few clicks take a snapshot of our data and use BigQuery in the backend to make that data available to us? So there are limitations to extract data source. While BigQuery can be updated in real time, you can stream data in real time to your BigQuery table. Extract data source you should set it up to extract data on preset intervals. That could be daily maximum, so you cannot extract data on an hourly basis or even per minute. So basically, when you're looking at a chart or a table with extract data source, then your data could be delayed by up to 24 hours. And the other limitation is that you can only extract 100 megabytes of data at the same time. I mean, that's a lot of data for a table like this, but again, compared to a BigQuery table that can handle gigabytes and terabytes of data, that is such a small volume of data. Now, to recap, let's take a look at a comparison between these 4 different data sources. So again, the data set is exactly the same. We are trying to read this number from the same data sets, from extract data source, from Google Sheets, from BigQuery and BI Engine, and live from Google Analytics. Okay, so let's apply the date range and see how quickly do they load and compare them with each other. Okay, so extract data, BigQuery are the first and second, then we have the Google Sheet, and finally we have data from live Google Analytics connection. Now let us review the characteristics and features of each of these data sources. So first of all, Google Analytics live connection. It's slowest in load time. I had situation that it took me up to a minute to load. The minimum data freshness is 4 hours. You can set it on your data source level. It does not need any prior setup. You just point, click, select your Google Analytics account, property and view, and you're done. You have access to all dimensions and metrics that are available in your Google Analytics account, and all dates are available. So if you have historical data going back 6 years, 7 years, 10 years in your Google Analytics account, you have all those numbers available with this connection. Next one, the Google Sheets. It loads fairly quickly. I had 5 to 10 seconds, but usually it loads quicker. The minimum data freshness is 1 hour because when you're setting up a API extraction from Google Analytics to your Google Sheet, usually with Google Apps Script or any tool that you use, it can be set up to retrieve data every hour. It needs some prior setup with medium difficulty. You need to decide what dimensions and metrics do you want to retrieve from your Google Analytics account. And it's a bit easier to use tools like Supermetrics, but you can also use the Google Sheet add-on for Google Analytics to perform and configure the API request and extract data from your Google Analytics view into your Google Sheet. And that prior setup means that only the extracted fields, the extracted dimensions and metrics are available to you when you connect your Google Data Studio to that Google Sheet. If you haven't extracted the dimension device category or one of your custom dimensions, for example, you won't have access to it, of course, in that Google Data Studio port. And then finally, again, of course, only extracted date ranges are available. So if you set up your Google Sheet to extract data just from this year, then when you connect it to Data Studio, you cannot expect that your graphs and charts in Data Studio to go back more than 1 year in time and retrieve your historical data. Next is BigQuery and BI Engine. You can expect very quick load times, 1 to 3 seconds, sometimes almost instantly. The minimum data freshness, unless you're streaming data from Google Analytics to BigQuery in real time using some tool or some kind of data pipeline that you've developed, is usually around an hour. So you can set up some script or Google Cloud function to retrieve data from your GA and put it inside BigQuery every hour. That's possible, but it is not real time. But that's okay, because at least for Google Analytics, there are other data processing delays as well, and hourly data won't be accurate at all. It needs prior setup. It can be difficult depending on the tool that you want to extract data from and put it into BigQuery. And it might cost you a bit to use third-party tools like Fivetran, Supermetrics, etc. to transfer your data from different tools into your BigQuery table. Again, only the extracted dimensions and metrics are available. So what you extract from your tool, Google Analytics, Google Ads, etc., is what will be available to you in Data Studio. And again, only the extracted date ranges are going to be available. And finally, extract data source. Again, it loads very quickly. You can expect the same speed of a BigQuery table and BI Engine. In this comparison that we did today, right now, it actually loaded a bit more quickly than BigQuery. I don't know why, to be honest. Minimum data freshness is 1 day. So you can set it up to extract data from your data source and create a snapshot on a daily basis. Okay, so your data could be delayed for 24 hours. It needs prior setup, but it's quite easy. You just click, create one, select your data source, select the dimensions and metrics that you'd like to be extracted, apply any filters, segments, date ranges, and then set it up to be extracted on a daily basis. It just takes like 5 minutes, maybe less. Again, I have a tutorial on Measure School on how to use and configure extract data sources. Feel free to watch it if you want more information about that. And just the other two, Google Sheets and BigQuery, only extracted dimensions and metrics are available, and only the extracted date ranges are going to be available. So if you want the most up-to-date data, the most ease of use, just point and click, and maybe you're okay or your clients are okay to wait a bit longer for data to be loaded from a live data source, then you can use the live connection to Google Analytics. But otherwise, if you want more responsive and quicker reports, then now you know about the features and differences of at least 3 more data sources that you can use with different levels of difficulty for setting up and ease of use and data freshness. So you can decide which one works best for your use case. So as a very quick final recap, if you want to improve the performance of your Data Studio reports, then you need to make sure that you know what you're doing with the amounts of components and charts that you placed on the report canvas, because each of these components like this are going to send an API request separately to a data source, to a tool to retrieve data from. And then you'd like to use data sources that are quicker to respond. For example, BigQuery to speed up the data retrieval process. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this video and you can use what you've learned today to speed up and improve the performance of your Data Studio reports. If you're new to Measure School, make sure to subscribe so you can get notified of the future videos that we publish. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment. This is Ahmed. See you in the next video.